I've no secrets. So,
Thanks for letting me record. What do you love most about performing for an audience?
well, the two things. One is the communication with people. Um, uh, as as you know from our academy, I think that music is a language. It really is like English or Hebrew or German, and the ability to sit in front of people and communicate emotions and a story that was told by a composer, and you're now sort of the driver of it, and you share it. That's an amazing feeling. Um, the other part is just the part that I love sitting on stage and being recognized for the hard work
Yeah,
that I have to do all those years in order to be able to play and to share those stories, those moments. So it's the two things. It's not so much the clapping of the audience, but it's really the feeling, the energy you have on stage where you can share that story, and at the same time you feel the adrenaline rush. And I guess athletes feel the same, and the politicians standing in front of public and giving a speech. So it's a feeling that a lot of people are concentrated at you and what you want to say. And by what you say, you can really move them. You can move them emotionally.
I see. Yeah. Tell me about like some of your first experiences performing. What was that like?
Well, I think the ones I remember the most from the beginning was when I was 15 and I was chosen to be a soloist with Israel's only national youth orchestra. I was part of the orchestra and I was chosen to play Haydn and C major on a tour in Europe. And the first concert before we went out to Europe was in the National Theater in Tel Aviv, in Israel, in front of 3,000 people. And I've never done anything like it. I've in fact never played a full concerto before. I used to play, I played the first movement of a concerto and so on, but not a big concerto. And I remember walking on stage and seeing that sea of like ants. I thought it's just ants, so many heads and the noise of the clapping, and I really freaked out
Uh-huh.
completely. And I managed to get through the performance, and I know that my parents almost got heart attack. Their 15-year-old child, sitting there and trying to get through that kind of emotional roller coaster. But then that same night, we took the flight to Europe, and then we played in Paris, in Berlin, in Brussels, and that experience made me really realize that I love it. This is not a struggle. The first one was a shock, just to see that amount of people and the power you have when you sit there on stage and share the music. But from the next day, I think we had 14 performances. I really felt at home. I felt that this is what I want to do. And obviously, I needed to work so much harder and more in order to get there professionally. But I knew that this is what I want to do.
I see. So you sort of embraced it fully.
I
Even
embrace it fully, and I mean, there was one now when I say share with you the stories. There's one more story from 2 years earlier. I was 13, and that was literally the first time I played with orchestra, and it was the Eckel Sonata,
oh,
arranged for cello and strings. And I remember my parents. Now this was the 80s of last century, so my father brought this boom box, this tape cassette, and we used to record like this. You would put a tape cassette. You don't even know probably what it is, but you press the two buttons, the record and the play together, and then the tape started going, and that's how you record it. And I remember walking on stage. It was a much smaller hall, and I saw my parents sitting there with this boom box. And then my father, by mistake, pressed the radio button and the news came on like really loud, and my parents tried to figure out which button, and I was so embarrassed, you can imagine.
yeah.
So after that, actually playing the piece was easy because I was so embarrassed by what my parents did that playing the cello was just no problem. So that was my first experience playing in front of an audience with an orchestra. But the second one, the more significant one, was with a Haydn, yes.
Yeah. What does your performance mindset look like? Walk me through how you mentally prepare and visualize a big performance.
Well, again, this is very similar, I think, to athletes. We all have our sort of rituals that we do the day of a performance. So when I usually, I take you through the day because I think everything in that day is important for me at least. And having, sharing with you what I do sometimes because you miss a flight or because you're late or because many other reasons, it's not working. But normally, the ultimate situation for me is to wake up, I'm in the hotel, to have a really good breakfast, and then to play scales. So to spend at least an hour, no matter what I perform, an hour of open string, just calmly warm up my fingers, my thoughts, my body. And then I go through the piece that I play. If it's a recital, it's more pieces. If it's a concerto, it's just a concerto. I go through it very slowly, even though I know that I play it, and usually there's a rehearsal with an orchestra that day as well. I would just go through it extremely slowly just to make sure that everything is in place. Then if it's a concerto, I will go, it will be like 10 a.m. already. I will go and run through the piece with the orchestra. When I was younger, I used to give everything in the dress rehearsal because it's a chance to play with orchestra and you get excited. These days, with more experience, I lay back a little bit. So I played kind of I call it going on a cruise control. I don't give everything. I just want to make sure that I'm with the orchestra, it's in tune, I feel okay on stage, they feel okay, the conductor is comfortable, and I know that in the evening I will give everything. So that's what I do. And then I go back to the hotel, and then comes the best part of the day of concert, which is huge lunch. I usually eat a very big lunch and then I go to sleep,
Uh-huh.
take a nap. And when I wake up, I always have good coffee and a Snicker bar. my thing. I will go to a machine in the hotel and I love Snicker bar. So I feel really ready if I do that. If it's a different kind of chocolate, it can do it, but it's not the same. So that's and then I slowly, dress up and go to the hall. I like to get about an hour and a half before to my dressing room. And then I always like to have something salty, like nuts, any kind of nuts, and a lot of water. And then I just want to be quiet, and I don't really, it's not nerve wracking that I have to play every passage. No. Again, I will play very slowly, very calmly. After doing it for many years, I kind of know I have the insurance sort of that it will be okay. It could be much better or worse, but it will be okay.
Mhm.
And usually before walking on stage, I will take one famous slow phrase from the repertoire for cello that is not in the program. And I will play it, like the slow movement of Brahms' piano quartet, the big cello solo,
Yeah.
or Kol Nidre, or Brahms' piano trios, big solos, or Schubert trio. We just play the solo just to get close to my instrument and to just find my connection to my sound. And I like to be called on stage like literally 10 seconds before I have to walk on. I don't like to stand there because I like to play, but again, not the piece that I'm performing. And then I walk on stage and I just play.
Mhm.
So that's my thing. And as I said in the beginning, many times it doesn't work because the rehearsal has to be in the evening or because I just arrived that day. So one of the things in this sort of ritual doesn't work. And I used to freak out if one of them, like if I don't have a Snicker bar, or if I didn't take a nap, or if I didn't do my scales. But right now, after doing it for so many years professionally, I kind of let go and I just try to enjoy the moment of being on stage. But I do like to have all those stages during the day of the performance, if possible.
I see. What advice can you give to younger performers who struggle with channeling nervous energy positively, leading up to a performance?
Well, the best advice would be to make run-throughs, to stage reality in any possible situation you have. So even at home, leave half an hour at the end of the day and make a run-through and imagine that the four walls around you are 3,000 people in Carnegie Hall. Record yourself. These days you have the iPhone, you can use that tool. Make run-throughs even virtually, like today, these days we can use the internet and we can make a live stream. Live stream can really freak us out because
Mhm.
we know that there's a possibility of people watching us. Maybe they don't, but there's a possibility. So all those things that will make you nervous before the performance. So when you get there, you're 150% ready because there's not one performance that you can anticipate what will happen. It's just not possible. So I always tell my students and myself, when I walk on stage, I need to know that things will happen, bad things, a blackout. The orchestra will do something that you did not plan on. The conductor will lose the spot. The great performers are the ones that know how to get out of those situations, and not the ones that think they will not get into those situations, because you will have a blackout. You will break a string on stage at least once. You will be affected by a horn solo that didn't come in the right place. I mean, these things will happen to you, and you cannot teach this. It needs to happen. So the mindset of performing and making mistakes and dealing with them is really important.
So putting yourself in that environment all the time that lets you sort of be ready for whatever happens on
Yeah.
stage.
Stage that reality as many times as you can. If it's in a studio class performance, if it's in front of your parents, in front of your friends, online live streaming, whatever it is that makes you nervous, it will help you in the real moment, even though the real moment is one. You cannot stage that, but you can get closer to it. So it's a big mistake to get on stage and never to run through the piece. I know that it sounds funny to you, but for some people it's not. So to run it through with piano many times. Sometimes even I ask the pianist, because it's a concerto, like Dvorak concerto, I ask the pianist, please play fortissimo the whole time, because that's what you're going to encounter when you play with orchestra. It's going to be very loud. And don't listen to me if I take too much time. Keep going as an orchestra, because 99% of orchestra will be like it. So you have to get ready for those situations. Many times people play Dvorak, for instance, and they try to make beautiful sound and very intimate, and it's all great. But if you're not aware of the amount of sound you have to make when you're on stage, you will be shocked when you will actually play with orchestra, and you will miss the opportunity in a way.
I see. Next, besides the piece itself, are there other aspects like when you're on stage, such as like your stage presence, your visual communication, your environment or accompaniment that you make changes for and you practice?
Definitely. So when I'm on stage, I always tell students that my best friends are the exit signs in the sides of the hall. Every hall has at least two, or if not four, or sometimes six or eight. And during the rehearsal, I look for them. I look for the exit signs, and I try to familiarize myself with them. So when the evening comes, I really try to play for them. I look at one of them, the other one, and those for me become people, because sometimes you can't actually see the people. But the worst you can do for yourself while you give a speech or a statement to many people is not to confront them, not to acknowledge them. So my best way to do it is those exit signs. I have to look up and I have to look at them, and I cannot hide. And that has helped me a lot. And I know that each one of us has, we have our different ways to do it. But any physical ways that will force you to look up, to communicate. And then I try to, with the orchestra, to have this triangle between myself, the concertmeister, and the conductor. I must have an eye contact with the two of them. So it's the conductor, concertmeister, and the exit signs. Those for me are must. And I know that if I do that, if I force myself to look at them, not all time, but to go between the three, I am more communicative to the public. If it's a pianist, it will be to acknowledge the pianist. I might not be able to actually see them because they sit behind us if it's a recital, but I will force myself to acknowledge them as much as I can. And I know that forces me to be much more communicative to the audience.
I see. Yeah. I think that's definitely something that like I've never thought about like looking at a landmark, but that
Yeah.
actually seems like a good idea now.
So what I do in lessons with the students, I tell them, you have three options. If you play a concerto, if you play by memory, is you can acknowledge the audience, the exit sign in that sense, or it would be an imaginary point on the wall we find in the studio, that would be a point you will look at. You can look at that point with your eyes open. You can stare at it but close your eyes, which is another form of communicating. Or you can communicate with your partner, may it be the pianist or a violinist and a pianist in a trio, or a concertmaster and a conductor. So I try to train my students to really go between those three options in the studio. So that physicality, those motions, they become friendly to them. Like to look up there while you're playing.
Mm,
It's very important because then what happens is that you become as a person, you're conversing with the people around you.
I see. Yeah. Even though you've probably played pieces hundreds of times, how do you approach improving your performance every time you step on stage? How do you keep it new and fresh? And
Well, it's funny you say it because when I studied the Dvořák with one of my teachers, um, he said at that time, I was 25, and he said at that time, Amit, I've played it about 250 times. That was Boris Pergamenchikov, a great, great Russian cellist. And when he said that, and he said, I've never been bored playing this piece because it's so, so amazing. And when I went home from the lesson, I thought, well, 250 times, that's not much. But then as I was thinking about it, I said, wait, 250 times? You actually sat on stage, and I started counting like the pieces that I played a lot, like the Haydn Concerto, or back then, Shostakovich Sonata, or some of the Bach suites. And the best one, I think it was Haydn, it was like 30. And I said, oh my God, 250 times. And he said, I'm never bored of it. I love it. It always, new question rises to me. And I realized that the pieces that we play, they're so good. They're not many, we're not like violinists or pianists, but Schumann Concerto, Haydn, Elgar, Dvořák, they're such masterpieces that I'm never bored of them. And when a student tell me, oh, I don't want to play the Elgar again because I did the whole last year with it and I really want something. I said, guys, how many times have you actually performed it? And we count, it's like, including performance class in our studio, it's like 3. And then I tell them the story, and that's just him. If you think of Yo-Yo Ma or those people, it's thousands of times. So to your question, I never get bored, and to play Dvořák with different orchestras, it's different. It's a different piece, and to play Dvořák with a different conductor is a different piece. And even though it's a piece that is in my fingers, whenever I pick it up for a performance, I always look at it differently because I teach it, and I am a different person. So honestly, maybe it's just me, but I'm not bored at all by those pieces, and they're all still difficult for me.
Mhm.
Not just the technical aspect, but they always raise different questions because I am a different person. So I'm always so excited when people tell me, "Do you want to play Elgar?" Yes. Schumann, yes. I love those pieces and I enjoy, and at each time it's climbing a mountain.
Mhm.
One story I can share with you about Piatigorsky that I didn't know him. I'm too young, but Mrs. Casals, who handed me the Casals cello, she told me the story about Piatigorsky playing the Schumann concerto once with Pablo Casals conducting. And Mrs. Casals, entered the green room, Piatigorsky's green room, and she saw him practicing all the passages really frankly, and he was sweating. And she asked him, Maestro Piatigorsky, why are you so nervous? I mean, you've played the Schumann, you recorded it, you played it so many times. And he said, I'm not nervous because of the audience. I'm nervous because I'm about to play Schumann concerto. And that's like reciting Shakespeare. And I get nervous before doing that. It's not because of the audience, it's because of the piece that I'm playing.
Mhm.
And that's a great story, I think, because those pieces we're playing are masterpieces. And it is feeling like climbing a mountain before we play, each time we play them. And that's nerve wracking. That's in awe of climbing the mountain of Dvořák or Schumann or Brahms sonata. That puts me in a place that I can never be bored by it. How can I be bored by such a masterpiece?
Uh-huh.
So every time, sometimes this passage will be easier, sometimes it will be harder. Sometimes a student will come up with a fingering that will truly solve a problem that I had in the past performance. So it's always exciting. And because you play a piece many times, you can try new things always.
Uh-huh.
So always interesting and always exciting, at least
I
to me.
see. Well, is there one takeaway advice you would share to a young artist looking to communicate with an audience?
Yeah, well, what I would say to young people is, especially these days, don't be afraid to stand up and talk to your audience. Don't be afraid of it, even if it's a concerto. Take a mic and say a few words. Don't just Google the piece and try to say something about the piece. We can do that as an audience. Say something personal, something about the piece that makes you love it. And that connection will make you feel better and less nervous, but will make them feel better listening to you and not just to a recording, because we have enough good performances of every piece for cello.
Mm.
But why do we want to listen to William or to Amit or to X or to Y? It's because of that personal connection. So if you walk on stage and you tell us one anecdote, something about it that makes it personal, when I will listen to you playing that piece, I will think about it, and it will make you connect to you specifically through that piece. And I think it's very important. When I was young, I didn't dare speaking to the audience, and I've made it a rule for me. Sometimes I can't do it in a concerto setup because it's a big hall, it's too many people. But in a recital, I always talk to the audience. I always say few words before each piece. I always leave at the end time for Q&A, and you will be shocked by the questions people ask. Sometimes they ask you just, how do you travel with a cello? But after the concert, they feel and you feel closer to your audience.
I
So
see.
that would be my advice. Always find that way to say few words, because the impact it does on the people and on you being able as an artist to stand up and say a few words is huge.
I see. Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I had. So thank you so much again for doing this.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's my pleasure, and I hope to be able to see, watch, or read whatever this project will end up being, So share with me the link or whatever it
Yeah, I
is.
will definitely share with you what this comes together as. And
Great.
good luck the recording the Bach. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay,
All right,
William.
thank you. Yeah.
Great. Great talking to you.